The dust motes suspended in the harsh morning light seemed to hang heavy, mimicking the suffocating silence that descended upon Elias and Maria, the air thick with the residue of unspoken shame and nascent fury. His raspy whisper, "Be mine," barely disturbed the parched ground, yet it struck Maria with the force of a physical blow. Though she did not flinch, her gaze still fastened to the cracked earth beneath her worn boots, refusing to meet his eyes. The rusted creak of the departing wagon, now a faint echo dissolving into the vast, indifferent landscape, left behind an even deeper silence, one of profound abandonment that resonated with Elias's own bitter history, a metallic tang of fear and a burgeoning, unsettling possessiveness coating his tongue. He could smell the acrid scent of dry grass mingling with the faint, lingering perfume of her unwashed journey, a scent that ignited a primal spark within him, a dark counterpoint to the public humiliation he felt for her and for himself. The distant, mournful groan of the wind-battered mill wheel seemed to mock his inner turmoil, grinding away at his already fractured resolve, while the dry air scratched at his throat, a constant reminder of the desolation that was both outside and deep within him. He watched her, a woman returned, a discarded relic, and felt a strange, fierce protectiveness rise, hopelessly entangled with something far darker, something he dared not name, but which pulsed with a dangerous, unsettling rhythm beneath his calloused skin. Maria remained motionless, a figure carved from dust and profound resignation, her heavy silence more impactful than any accusation, a vast, unspoken landscape of suffering that Elias intuitively understood, for it mirrored the barren expanses of his own desolate soul. Her downcast eyes, veiled by the shadows of her tattered bonnet, concealed a truth he felt thrumming beneath the surface, a secret far more profound and painful than the simple, brutal judgment of her age, a weight she bore with a stoicism that both intrigued and terrified him. He felt the phantom sting of his own past abandonments, the memory of faces that had turned away, blending with the chilling fear of the community's inevitable sneering gossip, the knowing looks that would follow him like vultures if he dared to claim her. But deeper than that societal fear, a raw, almost violent urge clawed at his gut, a possessive hunger for this broken woman, a perverse defiance against the world that had cast her aside, and in doing so, reflected his own perceived worthlessness back at him. The oppressive heat of the sun, relentless and unforgiving, seemed to press down on him, a physical manifestation of the crushing decision that lay before him, whether to submit to the tacit laws of their harsh existence or to forge a new, dangerous path, forever bound to Maria and the unspoken darkness that now stood between them, simmering beneath the relentless Old West sky. Aye, whisper of dust, stirred by a breath Elias hadn't realized he was holding, danced between them as Maria finally lifted her head. Her gaze, though still weary and stained with a profound sorrow, met his for the briefest, most searing instant. In that fleeting connection, a universe of unspoken suffering and grim understanding passed, a shared recognition of souls equally scarred by the unforgiving vastness of the land and the casual cruelty of its inhabitants. Her chapped lips remained sealed, but an almost imperceptible tightening around her eyes, a subtle tremor in her worn shoulders, spoke volumes of a weary acceptance, not of romance or salvation, but of a desperate reprieve, a grim bargain struck in the desolate silence of the sun-baked plains, a pact forged not in love, but in the shared indignity of being discarded. The faint, acrid scent of her unwashed journey mingled with the dry, mineral tang of the dust and the heavy, sweetish odor of the distant cattle, a visceral tapestry. Of the West, clinging to her threadbare dress as she stood, a silent monument to abandonment, her very posture articulating a deep, abiding resignation that resonated with the hollow ache within Elias. Her eyes, though dull from weeping, held a glint of something tougher, more guarded. The secret he had sensed now felt like a physical weight, a hidden stone in her gut, and his own dark possessiveness deepened, a primal understanding that whatever she concealed, it would now be his secret too. Bound to him by the unspoken vow of that desolate morning, under the searing, indifferent eye of the sky, Elias felt the words, "Be mine," echo in the hollow chamber of his chest, a sound both alien and profoundly his own, binding him to a path he hadn't consciously chosen, but now found himself irrevocably walking, the weight of the unspoken promise settling heavily upon his shoulders, cold as grave dust, yet strangely resolute. A shiver, not of cold, but of a primal certainty, snaked down his spine as the truth of his declaration crystallized. He had not just offered shelter, but claimed a burden, a defiance against the harsh, unwritten laws of their society, against the wagging tongues and the knowing glances that would now surely follow them, a decision that would forever isolate them on the fringes of an already sparse existence, the raw, guttural need to possess her, to protect her from the very judgment that mirrored his own self-loathing, warred with the gnawing fear of the consequences, the inevitable whispers carried on the wind, the quiet scorn that would brand them both as outcasts. But a stubborn, almost violent resolve began to take root in his hardened heart, a grim determination to face the world with her at his side, whatever unknown darkness she carried, whatever public shame it brought. The unrelenting sun beat down, turning the sparse landscape into a shimmering mirage, the distant, mournful creak of the windmill now sounding less like a lament and more like a warning, a rhythmic pulse marking the beginning of their shared uncertain future, a silent testament to the grim pact sealed between two broken souls on the dusty edge of nowhere. A profound, bone-deep weariness, a resigned acceptance of her fate, whatever harsh form it might take, settled over Maria as Elias's rough command, "Be mine," scraped through the scorching air, a tremor running through her not of fear, but of an utter surrender to forces far beyond her control. The coarse dust, caked on her worn, travel-stained dress, seemed to cling tighter, a heavy shroud symbolizing the inescapable grime of her existence, yet within the hollow echo of his words, a strange, fragile anchor appeared in the turbulent sea of public humiliation that had threatened to drown her. Her eyes, still downcast, registered the intricate spiderweb patterns of cracked earth beneath her scuffed boots, each fissure a testament to the unforgiving land, mirroring the innumerable cracks in her own. But now a tiny, almost imperceptible spark of something, perhaps relief, a cessation of the agonizing uncertainty, or even a nascent defiance, began to glow dimly, a small, rebellious flame against the chilling despair that had consumed her. The relentless sun continued its oppressive assault, baking the very air until it shimmered, carrying the faint, metallic scent of iron from the nearby, eternally groaning windmill, a smell that now seemed to mingle with the heavy, unspoken secret she carried, a shadow far denser than the shame of being returned, a truth more damning than her perceived age, which Elias, in his own dark resolve, had unwittingly claimed alongside her. Elias felt a strange, almost physical weight settle upon his already burdened shoulders, as Maria's silent bowed head affirmed his audacious, desperate claim. The very air around them seemed to thicken, pressing in with the unspoken understanding of a binding pact, forged not of love, but of mutual desperation and a defiant stand against a world that had discarded them both with such casual cruelty. He could taste the grit of the prairie, a bitter, dry coarseness on his tongue, a constant, visceral reminder of the harsh life he had just willingly complicated, burdened now not only with the immediate weight of her presence, but the even heavier phantom weight of her untold past. A silent, unseen presence that already pressed against his own haunted memories, merging seamlessly with the persistent ghosts that forever lurked at the desolate edges of his isolated existence. A single brazen fly, an irritating and inescapable sound, buzzed persistently around his ear, a mundane intrusion that seemed to mock the solemnity of the moment, drawing him back to the stark, unforgiving reality of the present, where a woman, battered and silent, now stood before him, waiting for his next command, her future, and perhaps his own tattered fragment of one, irrevocably tied to the harsh words he had uttered, into the indifferent, scorching wind. Maria's head, previously bowed in shame, now lifted ever so slightly, a gesture barely perceptible, yet to Elias it spoke volumes of a stark acceptance, a silent affirmation of his grim, almost predatory claim. Her eyes, still clouded with the residue of tears and resignation, briefly met his before darting away, not out of modesty, but from a deeply ingrained instinct to avoid further confrontation, to simply survive. The dress, a faded linen garment that clung to her weary frame, seemed to carry the scent of travel and unspoken indignity. Its wrinkles a testament to a journey not just across miles, but through a landscape of societal rejection, and as she took a hesitant step away from the dusty wagon, the fine red earth of the homestead clung to her worn shoes, a symbolic tether to this harsh new reality. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through her, a ripple of fear and a strange, desperate hope as she surveyed the dilapidated cabin, its rough-hewn timbers and rust-streaked roof promising little comfort. Yet it was a shelter, a refuge from the unfeeling world that had cast her aside like so much refuse. The distant, mournful creak of the battered windmill, a sound Elias had long grown accustomed to, now seemed to whisper a bleak welcome to her, an echo of the desolate future stretching before them both, a future born from a desperate pact made under the relentless, indifferent gaze of the unforgiving western sun. The air, heavy with the smell of dry grass and faint animal musk, pressed in on her, a suffocating embrace that promised both confinement and, perhaps, an obscure form of protection, a strange, silent promise in the vast, empty expanse. Her hands, calloused and rough from years of unceasing labor, clenched subtly at her sides, a silent declaration of her readiness to work, to earn her keep, to simply be, in a place where merely existing seemed a privilege. Elias, for his part, felt the taut string of tension within him slacken slightly, only to be replaced by a heavier, more complex knot of grim determination and unexpected, profound anxiety. The words had been spoken, the unspoken agreement forged, and now the undeniable weight of that commitment settled upon his shoulders, a burden he had both chosen and had thrust upon him by circumstance, by the sheer, unyielding cruelty of a world that left few other options. He watched her tentative movements, a silent, almost possessive gaze that acknowledged his new claim, and a strange, cold sense of purpose, long absent from his solitary existence, began to stir within his calloused chest, a flicker of something resembling resolve, however bleak its origins. The acrid scent of dust and the faint metallic tang of old rust from the wagon's fittings seemed to cling to her, an olfactory testament to her recent abandonment, and he found himself inexplicably drawn to it, to the raw, unvarnished truth of her plight. He cleared his throat, a rough grating sound that startled the very air, breaking the heavy silence that had stretched between them like a fragile, invisible membrane, and gestured vaguely towards the cabin with a hand scarred by years of toil. "Inside," he murmured, the single word a command and an invitation, stripped bare of any warmth, yet carrying the undeniable force of a new, shared reality, a future he had just unwittingly carved out for them both, a future intertwined with the whispering winds and the unending, indifferent expanse of the vast, unforgiving plains. His own heart, a weary drum in his chest, beat a slow, measured rhythm against the background of the creaking windmill, a grim counterpoint to the enormity of the decision he had just cemented. Maria slowly turned from the wagon, her head still bowed as if the very air pressed down upon her, each movement a testament to a spirit bruised but not entirely broken, a weary compliance etched into the tired lines of her face. The creak of the wagon's axles, a forlorn lament, seemed to follow her as she took the first tentative steps towards the weathered cabin, her worn boots disturbing the fine, ochre dust that lay like a perpetual shroud over the hard-packed earth. Elias watched her, a knot of conflicting emotions tightening in his gut, the grim satisfaction of his claim, the unsettling anxiety of what this meant, and a strange, almost voyeuristic fascination with her silent, burdened progress. The relentless sun beat down, turning the air into a shimmering haze, and the distant, rusty groan of the windmill offered a lonely counterpoint to the profound silence that enveloped them, a silence now pregnant with the weight of unspoken promises and the crushing reality of their entwined, uncertain fates. Her hand, calloused and rough, unconsciously smoothed the wrinkles of her faded dress, a small, futile gesture against the enormity of her situation, as if she could brush away the humiliation that clung to her like a second skin, a constant, tangible presence in the harsh, unforgiving landscape. As Maria finally crossed the cabin's threshold, the sudden plunge into its interior gloom felt like an immediate, visceral severing from the harsh, bright world outside, a stark delineation between the known past and this uncertain, confined future. The smell of old dry wood and the faint, lingering scent of stale pipe tobacco, the ghosts of Elias's solitary existence, now mingled with the subtle, earthy scent of... Elias remained outside for a long moment, the sun a scorching weight on his shoulders, his gaze fixed on the vacant space where she had just stood, the air vibrating with the sudden, profound absence of her presence, yet simultaneously filled with the undeniable, palpable reality of her having entered his life. His home. A cold shiver, despite the heat, traced its way down his spine, a premonition of the vast, uncharted territory he had just claimed, a silent recognition of the irreversible path he had set them both upon, the burden of her secret and the unspoken promises of possession now irrevocably sealed within the dim confines of his desolate dwelling. Elias remained rooted, a statue carved from the sun-scorched earth, his shadow stretching long and distorted behind him as the sun began its slow, deliberate descent, painting the sky in fiery hues that mirrored the turmoil within his own gut. The silence, once a familiar blanket, now felt like a taut wire stretched between him and the cabin door, vibrating with unspoken accusations and the clamor of his own possessive decree. A film of fine dust, stirred by the ghost of the departing wagon, clung to his rough denim, an irritating texture that mimicked the persistent worry gnawing at the edges of his resolve, questioning the prudence, the very morality of this dark bargain. He could taste the metallic tang of apprehension on his tongue, a flavor more potent than the stale pipe smoke that sometimes clung to. His mustache and his hands, calloused and strong, felt strangely weak, heavy with the weight of the unspoken future now locked behind that rough-hewn door, a future where her secret would intertwine with his solitude, irrevocably altering the desolate landscape of his existence. The rusty groan of the distant windmill, usually a melancholic comfort, now sounded like a protracted lament, an ancient warning echoing through the vast, empty expanse that threatened to swallow them whole. Inside the cabin, Maria stood motionless for a long while, allowing her eyes to adjust to the dim light that filtered grudgingly through the single grimy window, painting a faint, dusty path across the packed earth floor. The air, thick with the scent of aged wood, a faint mustiness, and the lingering echo of Elias's presence felt heavy, suffocating, yet strangely protective, a stark contrast to the blinding, mocking glare of the sun she had just endured. Her fingers, still trembling slightly, traced the rough grain of a nearby table, the splinters an almost welcome grounding pain against the abstract ache of her humiliation and the crushing weight of the secret she carried, a burden heavier than any physical load. She felt the silence wrap around her, not the vast indifferent silence of the open plains, but a close, intimate quiet, pregnant with the unspoken words that had just sealed her fate, a silence that seemed to throb with the very pulse of her new, desolate reality, a grim acceptance, slowly settling into her weary bones as she acknowledged the irreversible choice she had made. Maria, amidst the cabin's muted light, found her eyes slowly adjusting, tracing the stark lines of Elias's meager possessions, a crude wooden table scarred by countless meals, a lopsided shelf holding a few dented tins, and the cot, its straw mattress visible beneath a faded blanket, all imbued with the scent of old wood smoke and dust that seemed to cling to every surface. The air, though still and heavy, held a fragile promise of respite from the sun's relentless judgment, a small enclosed space that offered a strange, almost dizzying sense of confinement and security, pulling her gaze back to the packed earth floor where her own shadow, a distorted echo of her weariness, lay sprawled. Her fingers, no longer trembling with the immediate shock of her arrival, now smoothed the rough fabric of her travel-worn dress, a silent, unconscious act of self-comfort, as if the worn cotton could absorb some of the profound shame that still burned within her, a constant, dull throb beneath the surface of her forced composure, the undeniable weight of her secret pressing down with an intensity that made the very air around her feel thick and difficult to breathe. A subtle, almost imperceptible shiver traced its way up her spine, not from cold, but from the chilling finality of her situation, the quiet acceptance of her fate slowly seeping into her very bones, mingling with a faint, resentful flicker against the man who had claimed her. Outside, Elias watched the dust cloud rise and then slowly dissipate behind the departing wagon, its rhythmic creak fading into the immense, indifferent quiet of the plains, a sound that carried with it the last vestiges of his old solitary life and the unsettling advent of his new, complicated reality. The sun beat down upon his bared head with an almost physical malice, a tangible pressure that seemed to mirror the heavy weight settling. In his gut, a grim satisfaction at his defiance warring with a burgeoning anxiety for the unknown path he had just forged, a path now inextricably linked to the silent, burdened woman within his cabin. His gaze drifted across the sun-baked earth, the cracked, thirsty soil reflecting the harshness of a life where choices were few and often brutal, where a man's word, even if unspoken, carried the force of an oath, and now his word had tethered two desolate souls together. The dry whisper of the wind through the sagebrush carried not solace, but 1,000 unspoken questions, a chilling reminder of the community's unseen eyes, the inevitable whispers and judgments that would follow. Yet beneath it all, a dark, possessive current pulsed, a primitive triumph in having defied the unspoken rules, a defiant, almost desperate claim against the vast, empty canvas of his own existence, leaving him with a stark mixture of grim resolve and an unsettling dread for the hours that lay ahead. Maria, with a hesitant breath that seemed to catch in the dry air, stepped over the worn threshold, her shadow briefly swallowed by the cabin's oppressive gloom as her eyes struggled to adjust from the sun's blinding assault. The interior, a cramped space of rough-hewn timber and earth-packed floor, reeked faintly of stale tobacco, dried sweat, and the metallic tang of old rust from the stovepipe, a smell that clung to the air like a shroud, a stark contrast to the vast, airy emptiness she had left behind. Dust motes danced in the sparse shafts of light that pierced the grimy panes of the single window, illuminating the meager furnishings, a narrow cot covered with a threadbare blanket, a scarred wooden table, and a couple of mismatched chairs, each item speaking of a solitary existence, devoid of comfort or softness. She moved with an almost ethereal quietness, her slight form a dark silhouette against the cabin's dimness, her gaze sweeping across the unfamiliar confines with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion, a deep-seated resignation that seemed to soak into the very fabric of the old cabin walls. Elias watched her, a knot tightening in his stomach, the stark reality of her fragile presence within his stark domain hitting him with a sudden, almost suffocating force, an intrusion into a carefully constructed solitude that now felt irrevocably shattered. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the distant, rhythmic creak of the windmill and the faint whisper of the ceaseless wind, an unwelcome witness to this unsettling, forced communion. Elias, his calloused hand still resting on the doorframe, felt the weight of the moment press down upon him with a tangible force, the dust on the floorboards suddenly seeming to mock the pristine order he had unknowingly maintained in his solitary life, now disrupted by a foreign presence. He could taste the dry grit of the outside world on his tongue, a constant reminder of the relentless land, yet inside the air was close, heavy with unspoken questions and the palpable burden of Maria's unvoiced suffering, which seemed to emanate from her like a heat haze. Her shoulders, still slightly hunched, told a story of prolonged endurance, a silent testament to a life lived under the shadow of judgment. And Elias, in that instant, felt a strange, unsettling resonance with her plight, a mirroring of his own deep-seated grief and the silent battles he waged against the vast indifference of the frontier. The sun, a brutal disk of fire outside, cast long, distorted shadows through the cabin's single window, making the familiar space feel alien, a stage for a drama he hadn't chosen, but had grimly embraced, and he found his own gaze dropping to his boots, a sudden unfamiliar shame blossoming in his chest, a complex mixture of pity, possessiveness, and a raw, burgeoning fear for the unknown depths of the secret she carried, a truth that pulsed beneath her quiet dignity like a hidden, venomous serpent. The slow, rhythmic tick of a hidden insect in the walls seemed to echo the beating of his own heart, a drum against the profound, terrifying silence that now stretched between them. Two strangers, bound by a promise made under the most brutal of circumstances. The silence deepened, stretching taut between them until it hummed in Elias's ears, a low, oppressive drone that seemed to vibrate through the very planks of the cabin floor. He watched Maria, still perched on the edge of the crude wooden bench, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles white beneath skin that was too pale, too thin for the harsh sun of the territory, and a faint tremor ran through her, almost imperceptible, like a leaf caught in a phantom breeze, betraying the immense effort it took for her to maintain such an unnerving stillness. He caught the subtle scent of dust and stale journey clinging to her worn dress, mingling with the earthy aroma of his own abode, a stark reminder of how abruptly her world had collided with his, and the sight of a faint, almost healed bruise blooming high on her cheekbone, just beneath the tired hollow of her eye, sent a fresh wave of disquiet through him, a grim confirmation that her burdens extended far beyond the public shaming. That an unheard secret, a phantom weight, now seemed to twist the very air they breathed, pulling at the corners of his mind, demanding recognition even as it resisted any form of articulation, leaving him adrift in a sea of unspoken questions, a quiet fury beginning to simmer beneath the surface of his practiced stoicism. The stark light of afternoon, a yellow-orange wash filtering through the grimy window pane, began to soften, hinting at the slow, inevitable descent of dusk. And Elias found himself acutely aware of the ticking hours, of the approaching night that would demand more than just silent observation. The mundane realities of their sudden, unwilling cohabitation began to prick at the edges of his tumultuous thoughts, the need for food, for water, for a place for Maria to truly rest becoming urgent practical anchors in the swirling chaos of his emotions. He cleared his throat, the sound rough and ill-suited to the stillness, and the small, almost imperceptible flinch that rippled through Maria's frame at the noise struck him with the force of a physical blow, a testament to her heightened state of fear and vulnerability, reinforcing the deep, unsettling chasm that separated them despite their shared space. He shifted his weight, his worn boots scuffing lightly against the packed earth floor, feeling the sudden, overwhelming burden of responsibility for this fragile, broken woman, a silent promise forming in the dusty air that he could not simply let her sit there, a statue of suffering, but the words, heavy with unspoken questions and grim resolve, still refused to form on his parched tongue, caught somewhere between a command and a desperate plea. The words remained stubbornly lodged in Elias's throat, thick with a lifetime of unspoken grief and the raw, unfamiliar ache of responsibility, even as the last tendrils of daylight receded from the grimy window panes, plunging the small cabin into a deeper, more oppressive gloom, the encroaching darkness amplifying Maria's stillness until she seemed less a woman and more a shadow coalesced from his deepest fears. He could feel the fine dust coating his tongue, taste the dryness of the air, and a sudden, visceral awareness of Maria's probable thirst, her hunger, the basic needs of a living being that he in his tumultuous internal landscape had all but forgotten, pricked at his conscience, a sharp, unwelcome reminder of the raw, brutal reality of their forced communion. The creak of the aging timbers overhead, the faint, distant moan of the wind through the eaves, each sound felt magnified in the heavy quiet, each a solitary lament mirroring the desolation in his own chest. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the silence between them, thick and suffocating as it was, carried a weight far heavier than any spoken accusation, burdened by the unrevealed truth that still lay dormant in Maria's bowed form, a truth that promised to unravel not just her past, but the very fabric of his own meager existence. The urge to break it, to shatter the quiet with a command or a question, was almost overwhelming, yet he remained rooted, paralyzed by the sheer enormity of what her silent presence represented, the unyielding judgment of a world he'd tried to escape, now delivered directly to his doorstep. With a sudden guttural expulsion of breath, Elias finally moved, the sound a ragged tear in the suffocating silence, and he turned towards the rough-hewn table, his calloused fingers fumbling with a tin plate, the scraped metal clattering loudly, brutally, in the stillness, a stark announcement of his grim, resolute intent to acknowledge her presence, to provide, not out of tenderness, but out of a harsh, inescapable duty that now bound them irrevocably. He poured a measure of water from the clay jug into a chipped enamel cup, the faint gurgle echoing in the small space, the mundane act a profound, desperate gesture of acceptance, a tacit agreement to the terms of their unholy union, his heart a raw, bleeding thing beneath his ribs, heavy with the weight of the unspoken promise that Maria, broken and silent, was now his, in a way that transcended simple ownership, a possession forged in the crucible of communal disdain and his own desperate yearning for something, anything, to fill the gaping void within him. Maria slowly, almost imperceptibly, raised her gaze, her eyes, dark pools reflecting the dying light, met his for a fleeting moment, a flicker of something unreadable passing between them, not gratitude nor defiance, but a profound, weary understanding of their shared bleak fate, a silent pact sealed in the dust-choked air of the cabin, the heavy secret still coiled between them like a viper, but their immediate future, however grim, now irrevocably set. The day had ended, but their intertwined story, burdened by sorrow and an unsettling intimacy, had only just begun in earnest within the confines of his desolate, unforgiving land.